AA. I came to AA in November, December of 22. But I was still going to meetings and drinking. I hadn't quite yet gotten the thing, right? But January 9th is so important to me because I went to a meeting by accident. I was in treatment. I was in outpatient treatment, and they required us to go to 3 meetings a week. And I'd not met my quota yet, and I decided to go to this random 8 a.m. meeting because I needed to meet my quota before the 8 p.m. Or 5 o'clock IOP. And the man at that meeting, who became my sponsor, is still my sponsor. He said, "You can't think your way into sober living, but you can live your way into sober thinking." And that got my attention for multiple reasons because I started drinking at 17. But during my drinking career from 17 to about 30, I tried to do a lot of things myself to fix myself. When I read step 3 in the big book, from how it works, it hit me like a ton of bricks because that was me, right? I was always trying to find some self-help mechanism. I read a bunch of books. I tried so hard by myself to fix myself, and I couldn't do it. It didn't work. I had to have a solution that was, again, a higher power, something bigger than me that could solve my problem. So for me, the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and the relationship with my higher power and being of service in Alcoholics Anonymous has been what's kept me sober. I was actually just at a meeting and we read something that I kind of want to use to kind of segue into I guess my story. But I read this, we were reading acceptance was the answer. And obviously everyone knows page 417. But what struck out to me was a line on page 416 that said, "The people of AA had something that looked much better than what I had, but I was afraid to let go of what I had in order to try something new. There was a certain sense of security in the familiar." And that's what happened to me. I came into I went to treatment because my life had become unmanageable. I decided, okay, I didn't like the way I was living and problems kept happening. I kept wrecking cars. I got a DUI. My life wasn't manageable, but it was comfortable, right? I knew the chaos. The chaos was a big part of my life, and I knew what I would get. I didn't know what a sober life would look like. And since I've been sober, it's been exciting. I've got to be of service in Alcoholics Anonymous and to my family, in the process of making amends and trying to live a different life. But being an alcoholic was the only life I knew for so long. It's like I said, I started drinking when I was 17 when I got to college, and alcohol for me for the longest time was the solution, right? It was the solution to the me problem. Whenever I was sad, whenever I was happy, whenever I needed to feel different than how I felt, I drank, right? And obviously I didn't start off drinking alcoholically, but at some point it crossed the line where all I was doing, almost every time I could get my hands on it, I was drinking. I did well enough in college to graduate, and then I decided that, well, maybe it wasn't me that was the problem. Maybe it was where I was and the people I hung out with. So I did a geographic. I decided I was going to do grad school, and then I left Atlanta to go to Chicago. And what funny thing happened, right? I was still the problem, right? The same things that happened to me in Atlanta happened to me in Chicago. I drank the same way. I found friends that drank the exact same way that I drank, and my problems kept piling up. And I love that. There's a part in the big book where it talks about, I think it's in the doctor's opinion, right? It talks about we start drinking and our problems pile up to the point that we can't handle it anymore. And that's my story. My alcoholism was progressive, right? It didn't start off. I didn't take that first drink and my life fell apart, right? It took time for my life to completely fall apart to the point where I decided I needed help. And so Chicago, I was in grad school. Things were going fine. I was still chugging along, right? And that kept me in my drinking for as long as it did because life was still manageable, right? I could do enough to get by until life kind of hit me with a freight train. I'm also, in addition to my alcoholism, I'm bipolar. So I kind of had a manic episode in grad school and I had to drop out, and then my life kind of fell apart. And the only way I could find to solve that problem or to make myself feel better was to continue drinking. And so I moved back to Macon for about a few months and got a job in Seattle. And then I was like, well, what would fix my problem again is another geographic because, again, I'm not the problem. My drinking is not the problem. Maybe if I move somewhere else, maybe if I try something else, maybe it will get better. So I moved to Seattle, lived there for a year, and I decided that life wasn't getting any better. And the only solution I knew to life's problems was to drink. So I started drinking again, stopped taking my bipolar medicine, and my life fell apart again. I moved back to Macon. While I'm in Macon, I get another job. Things are going fine. But the thing about living in Seattle or Chicago is I didn't really have to drive anywhere. So I could manage the problem. Like my life hadn't become, I was sad, I was depressed. I didn't like the way I was living, but I could manage it because there were no external consequences, right? Because I always gauged, and this is something I learned from you all and the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and the Big Book, right? It's like I confused alcoholism for the consequences. What I've learned and what is true for me today is that the consequences are not the alcoholism. The fact that what makes me an alcoholic is that when I start drinking, I can't stop drinking, right? I have an allergy of the body. I have a mental blank spot that says that doesn't remember doesn't remember what happened, and I have a spiritual malady. That's what makes me an alcoholic. The stuff that happens around me, the tornado I create, is just consequences of that, right? And I didn't understand that, right? I thought if my life was okay, if I wasn't getting into trouble, if things were going decently okay, I could still keep doing what I was doing. So that happened until my life reached the point where it got to a level where I decided I didn't want to keep going anymore. So it was funny when I went to treatment, I told them that I wanted to learn to drink better. And they were like, no, we don't do that here. We're an abstinence program. So you have to stay sober. And and that wasn't enough, right? That I still kept drinking in treatment and going to meetings. But I was going to meetings, I was meeting my quota, but it wasn't sinking in yet because I hadn't, and that's why I like when they say keep coming back, because at least for me, I didn't know what was going to get my attention, right? And like I said earlier, what got my attention was that line that the man who became my sponsor said. And the coolest part about it actually is not just the fact that he said those lines, and what really happened at that meeting is that he came up to me afterwards, introduced himself to me, and asked me if I wanted a ride, because I didn't get to the meeting by myself. I was given a ride there. And I love the fact that we read the responsibility statement, because he reached out, right? The hand of AA reached out. He had never seen me at that meeting before, and he reached out his hand, right? And at first I didn't take the ride because I was like, this man is a stranger. I don't know you. I'm going to find my way to where I need to get to. So I didn't accept the offer that day, but I came back to that meeting. And then for the next 2 to 3 months, I would get to the meeting somehow. And he told me, if you can make it to an AA meeting, we'll get you where you need to get to. And for the next 2 to 3 months, he took me back to work after going to the meeting. And in that process, he shared with me the program. He 12-stepped me. He shared with me his experience with alcoholism and how he used the solutions provided in the Big Book. He called them the tools, the spiritual toolkit. And he explained to me how that made his life tolerable. He showed me how to live a sober life, even when things got bad. He showed me about the design for living and all that stuff. And I didn't know that's what I needed at the time, but that's what I needed, right? And that's how that was my introduction into Alcoholics Anonymous, was through this man who decided he was going to take time out of his day to talk to me. That's basically what it was like and what happened. What it was like was that life was getting progressively unmanageable, and I decided I needed to get some help. And at first I guess I balked at the help because I didn't know what life would look like on the other side of sober. But now that I've been sober about 2 years and a few months now, life has been pretty good. It's not been perfect. I wrecked a car in sobriety. That was interesting. But since I got sober, I've gotten that same man took me to my first district. Some people, it could be an intergroup for some people, but he took me to my first district meeting, and that's where I heard about GCYPAA for the first time. Because when I first got sober, I thought I was going to be bored. I thought that life was going to be completely uninteresting, right? I thought that I was just going to go to work, come home, and sit on my hands, right? And that's not what's happened in my case. I joined the host committee about 2 months sober. I knew nothing about steps. I knew nothing about traditions. I knew nothing about concepts of world service, but I was willing, right? I like to say that I love a triangle, right? Unity, service, and recovery, or recovery, unity, and service. I kind of came in the back end. I got into service first, and then I got into the unity of the fellowship, and then I worked my steps. But what got me in the door wasn't, I did work my steps, but GCYPAA and the other service commitments I had kept me busy enough and kept me occupied enough to begin digesting the steps and the spiritual stuff that was being taught to me. Got in the host committee. We hosted in 2023, and that was an amazing experience. That for me was a way that I saw Alcoholics Anonymous work I saw the triangle in action, right? I saw people talking about recovery. I saw people coming together, and I saw service at work. And that kind of lit a fire in me for the program, and I worked through my steps as quickly after that. I think I was about on my fourth step when GCYPAA happened, and I kind of went through it as quickly as possible after that to get through the rest of the steps. But since GCYPAA, I joined the advisory committee, and I've been serving there, and I've been to, I think, maybe 10 conferences. And what I love about GCYPAA and on any other YPAA conference is that they're not just it's not just about fun and games, right? You know, it's to carry the message to the sick and suffering alcoholic. That's really the purpose of it, in my opinion, and in my understanding is that you never know who needs to hear the message, right? So we create an environment where somebody can come in and we can transmit that to them, right? And that's what happened when I hosted. I got to see people come up to me afterwards and tell me that they were able to experience things and understand things that they've been struggling with for a long time, right? And that was really powerful for me, and that kept me very interested. And since I've gotten sober, I haven't been bored. Right? That's the one thing that I feared hasn't happened. I also serve at the group level. I'm the GSR of my home group, and my home group isn't a young people's meeting. It's oldie part, I guess, but I learned so much from the old timers, and hearing from their experiences kind of it reassures me that, you know, life goes up and down. Like my life since I got sober hasn't been great. I mean, I was on probation during my sober time. I had to go to court a couple of times. Work isn't always perfect. I have relationships, human relationships that are kind of a struggle sometimes. But that's why I love the steps, and are really helpful for that, right? I kind of stay right now in 10, 11, and 12, right? Because there's a part in the 12 and 12 that I love, that where Bill talks about. He says self-examination, meditation, and prayer. Separately, they're useful, but together, when you combine the three, they make for a great foundation. And I didn't really understand that when I first came into AA. I was suggested for me that even before I got to those steps, that I should take an inventory. I should talk to somebody about it. I should meditate, and I should pray. And I started doing those things fairly early on in sobriety, even before I got to those steps. And I didn't understand the utility until stuff came up, right? Shit happened. And I was like, oh, okay, I see the value in doing these things, right? Because I guess for me, since I've gotten sober, things haven't piled up, right? You know, the stuff that piled up that I got out of my chest on my fifth step, and then the things I had to make amends for, the stuff hasn't piled up since then, right? And that's been pretty good. And you know, and I've started to develop a conscious contact with my higher power as I've come to understand him. And lately, I don't know, I've been going to some really good meetings where we've talked about the God concept. I think one of the daily reflections recently was about the spiritual kindergarten, and I love that so much, because that's what Alcoholics Anonymous was for me. You know, it told me that all I had to do was believe in a God of my own understanding, right? And I should develop a relationship with a God of my own understanding. And that for me was freedom, right? Because I grew up fairly religious, and I ran away from those ideas as quickly as I could, because I was being told what to believe, and I wasn't given explanations. I wasn't being told why to believe those things. And I know it's kind of funny, when I first came to treatment, I read the steps on the wall, and I kept seeing God, and I was like, I balked at that, right? I was like, this thing that I've been running away all my life from, they're telling me that's the solution to my problems, right? But then I missed the fine print, right, where it says God of your understanding, right? God as you understand him, right? And I think that is so important for us, at least for me as an alcoholic, because it tells me that it's God as I currently understand him, right? And I don't have to understand all of it to connect to the power, right? I don't have to understand all of God, because my God, as I understand him, is infinite, right? And I'm very finite. My understanding is very limited. And what that means is I can only grasp a little bit, right? But that little bit that I grasp is powerful enough, right, to get me through, right? It's powerful enough to keep me sober. It's powerful enough to get me through the day that as I go through it. Yeah, and yeah, that's kind of how life has been for me. You know, since I've gotten sober, life has become a lot more manageable, mostly because I try not to manage it myself, right? You know, I've given up that responsibility, and I think that happened. And I don't do it perfectly. And I think that's the great part about this program. It talks about progress, not perfection. And And every once in a while, you know, I something comes up in life and I want to take my self-will back, right? Because step three was a step that I struggled with for the long, and six and seven I also struggled with too, because you know, I want to be in charge, right? That was my problem, right? I am an alcoholic and I drink because I like the effects produced, but I also have a spiritual malady, and my spiritual malady is self, right? It's self-directed. I want to do things my way and I want to please myself, and it's all about self-gratification and all that stuff, right? And now it's all about, and now something happened, right? And it says how it works. It doesn't say why it works, right? So something happens. I did certain things, and now my deepest wants are to be of service to other people. My deepest wants are to be of help to other people. And yeah, I also sponsor some people, and that's been one of the greatest parts of my sobriety too, because you get to see the light. At least I get to see the light turn on in other people, right? And I get to see them grow, and I get to see the change happen in them. And my sponsor always told me when we did step work, it was like, you know, you're helping me more than I'm helping you. And I didn't understand it, right? And that's the way it's been with me with all the steps. And as I keep going through, is that I don't understand things until I understand them. And when I understand them, then it's like it's wow, you know, it's pretty great. Um, and yeah, it's not always perfect, it's not always easy, but I would rather be on the side of life than where I was before, because I still have like journals from when I was drinking and when I was in my alcoholism, and I read it sometimes, and it's like it's depressing, and I was in a lot of self-pity, you know, and I didn't I could see the problems, but I didn't know the way out, right? Or at least I thought I could see the problems, right? But what Alcoholics Anonymous has helped me do is it's let me see the primary problem, and that's the fact that one, I can't take that drink, right? But if I don't take that drink, I have to do other things, right? For me, there's a difference between being sober and working a recovery program, because some days I don't drink and I'm still kind of an asshole, right? I'm still not a good person to be around, right? And the only way that that gets solved is if I work the steps of the program, if I try and be of service to another human being. And at least the third step, right, the seventh step, right, it's always about, okay, here's the problem, and then how can I be of service to somebody else, right? And that's what's animated my recovery. My recovery has been animated by, okay, see the problem, pray to God about it, and then how do I turn that around to be of service? And that's what all this thing has all been about to me. I'll end with this. But one of the guys I was working with, you know, he was like, you know, there's a lot of shame and guilt with being an alcoholic and not being able to, because there's a part in the big book where it talks about it's one of those, if it's a disease, right? But most diseases, if you tell people you have them, they feel bad for you. But if you say you're an alcoholic, nobody feels bad for you, and that comes with a lot of shame and stigma. And for me, it doesn't feel that way anymore, because now my biggest defect has become one of my greatest assets, right? I can share the fact that I was in a place of uncontrolled drinking. I couldn't manage my life. It was a mess. And now it's now my biggest asset, because I got through it, right? Not by myself, but with the help of a higher power and my fellows. And now it's something I can transmit to other people, right? And that's probably the greatest gift of this whole thing. So thank you all for letting me share. It's been great to be here. And yeah, hope you got something out of that. Thank you.